So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Five Nights at Freddy. So let's start the series. Sakura leaned back in her chair. Despite its simplicity, the rolling chair was enjoyable. In a stuffy, slightly cramped office, papers, trash, and antiques that had probably been left there by the shift before her were strewn across a desk in front of her. Really, these people were slobs. In addition, there was a quite odd cupcake with eerie eyeballs on it. She was sitting in Freddy Fazbear's security office at Ramen Palace. It was situated in a small village within a small country. It was supposedly well known among the locals for its strange animal-shaped puppet acts, food, and dark history. It appears that there have been several homicides in this area. The management seemed to want to deny it, but it was talked about everywhere. Strangely, that didn't stop anyone from coming or, apparently, breaking in. That's why SHE was here. The management dispatched a C-rank assignment to Konoha to police the region from midnight until 6 in the morning in an attempt to reduce expenses. Normally, she would find this kind of labor amusing, but when the fifth head master pleaded with her to accept it, she did so because she could aid in the capture of a murderer. If things went as slowly as she had expected, she would also have time to study the scrolls that the fifth head master had given her. After all, she was just in her second year of apprenticeship. She still had a long way to go before she could become a medical nin of the fifth head master level. She had everything arranged. She would simply relax, use minimal power in the room, and check the cameras every 10 to 15 minutes to reduce the amount of energy she was using. It was a momentous occasion. They were so thrifty that they supposedly couldn't buy a suitable generator for night shifts. She was limited in how much power she could use. But that was all right. She was a ninja. In addition, she was a medical professional. She was adept at extending activities and conserving materials. She was about to make her first round of the restaurant when the office phone rang, giving her a start. Who would call her? Before she could even start to pick up the receiver, a voice called out. That was fascinating indeed. Hello? I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. Already taped? Very fascinating. And what a kind man. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact. So I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll do fine. So, let's just focus on getting you through your first week. Okay? Okay, so this shouldn't be too bad. It appears to be rather simple. There is, of course, something like this. Why were executives giving legal speeches? Well, let's see. First, there's an introductory greeting from the company that I'm supposed to read. It's kind of a legal thing, you know. I suppose this is from Freddy Fazbear's Ramen Palace. A unique environment where kids and adults may enjoy themselves and use their imaginations. They would be worried about that, of course. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. A missing person report will be filed within 90 days, or as soon as property and premises have been thoroughly cleaned and bleached, and the carpets have been replaced. Wait, what was that last sentence? Bleached and cleaned? I know that sounds terrible, but blah blah blah. Doesn't that sound terrible? That was terrible, wasn't it? But there's really nothing to worry about. The mechanical figures here do get a bit eccentric at night. What? But do I blame them? No. If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too. Annoyed? What do you mean, irritable? Therefore, remember that children have a special place in their hearts for these characters, and we ought to show them some deference, will we? For your information, the characters do have a propensity to wander around a bit. They are left in free-roaming mode at night, and they were able to move around during the day until the bite of 87. Their servos, for some reason, lock up if they are left off for an extended period of time. You know, It's incredible that the human body can survive without the frontal lobe. What? Now, in terms of your safety, the only real danger to you as a night watchman here, if any, is that these characters probably won't identify you as a human if they happen to see you after hours. They'll probably see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on. Wait. Was that the only time he hesitated? On the majority? Why would he hesitate? How could they think I was an endoskeleton? What is an endoskeleton? Now, since that's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. Alright. Why is that bad? In addition to being degrading? Well, now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with crossbeams, wires, and animatronic devices, especially around the facial area. You can see how it could be uncomfortable and even fatal to have your head pushed firmly into one of them. Naturally, the only parts of you that would probably be visible again are your teeth and eyes when they emerge from the front of the mask. What exactly is animatronic, I wonder? Why, yeah, they don't tell you these things when you join up. Why? Well, the first day should be easy. Tomorrow I will speak with you. Check those cameras, and don't forget to shut the doors only when absolutely need. Power must be conserved. Okay, good night. Fantastic. Fantastic. Not only did she have to worry about possible murderers and punks, but she also had to worry about 3 deadly animals that weren't just puppets. Crank her ass. At least this was B rank. She sighed to herself and rubbed her eyes with her thumb and index finger. Well, anything. It shouldn't be too hard. Just reduce the time between checks to 5 to 10 minutes, and probably stop reading the scrolls entirely. Besides, how horrible could it be? From what she could see, they were really big, but the room wasn't small, so it would take some time to get to her office. Of course, if they got over here. She had a quick tour, so why didn't she ask more questions? She thought they were just backstage puppets, but it looked like they were, what was that word? Animatronic? And made their own move? She was a ninja, so she had the ability to read between the lines. This probably wasn't just the bite the guy described, it probably happened earlier. In addition, she had seen a number of bizarre and seemingly impossible things happen during her career and time with Naruto, so why wasn't this possible? After all, a puppet could move without strings if a ship could fly without wings. She glanced at the clock and realized that she had missed some of her sweeps. She quickly lifted the little viewing screen for the night watchman, which was beautiful, as though it were from Spring Country. She froze after first examining the show stage where the 3 animals were. "Where's the rabbit?" she cried, and started looking through cameras immediately, until she saw the purple outfit in the dining room. It appeared to be looking around, but it was just standing there. Alright, that was strange. So they could actually move by themselves. She checked the other cameras again just in case, and when she saw that the other 2 were still there, she stopped at the show stage. The tablet screen went off as soon as she put it on her lap, so she put it down. A business that cleaned up after any potential murders before filing a missing persons report would make about the same amount of sense. As a result, one of the requirements was to complete the task for at least a week. This was more complicated than she had thought, but she couldn't panic because, although she had been given hints that the monsters could kill her if they approached, it was still early, and they might not even wander down here, they might just happen to wander around. It was probably completely arbitrary, and it made sense. She took a deep breath and thought, "Don't get too irritated, please." She had to be alert and have her wits about her. After taking another breath, she started performing movements that focused on her inner energy. She would have to concentrate. Fifth Head Master's strength technique wasn't perfect yet, but she would be damned if she wasn't at least prepared to push these creatures back. A few minutes later, she checked the exhibition room, and both were still there. The rabbit was still in the eating room, which was great. That became a habit. To keep herself calm, Sakura would check the cameras while working out. She stayed at about 6-7 minutes. The rabbit puppet seemed content to stay in the dining area and supply closet, though she occasionally went to the beginning of the hall that led to her office. The chicken started to wander an hour into her watch. She seems to like the kitchen and restrooms. That chicken made a lot of noise in the kitchen, boy. 2.5 hours later, she had her first near miss. For the most part, it had been quiet. When she heard it, she had been focused on using her inner strength. The footsteps were so quiet that she could only hear them because she was used to hearing them. If they had been ninja, she would have put them at low tune-in or high gen-in, but the animatronics were the only thing there, and they were big and unwieldy, so they couldn't possibly be silent. Then, beyond her door, the footsteps stopped. She reached out and pressed the light switch. The rabbit was standing in the doorway, staring at me, but seemed to be still. She calmly and quickly let go of the light button and pressed the door button. He warned against using the doors because of this, and she noticed that the chicken was at the beginning of the corridor. She checked the cameras as it thudded into place and saw that the production of electricity was very high. Really? Does the cost of the doors include power? She took a deep breath, set the screen aside, and looked at the window to her left. After a few minutes of waiting and pressing the lights button, she saw that the window was empty. She pressed the door button and relit the corridor, but no one was there. She checked the cameras. All right, the chicken and rabbit are back in the supply closet. Oh no. Oh God, it's okay, she said, turning quickly to her right and almost screaming by clicking the light switch. The bird was there, almost in her office. It may still be purely coincidental. After all, they appear to disappear as well and have no one to guide them. Thus, it shouldn't be a major issue. The next 3.5 hours were crucial. She reduced the amount of time she spent between glances to 4 minutes, and she also had to close both doors 4 more times. By the end of the evening, she was quite nervous and had only 5% energy when 6 in the morning arrived. Things like that had continued, especially that chicken, which seemed to hate leaving the door once it appeared. The bunny kept coming, making up 4 of her 6 door closures, but it wouldn't last long. She would have to deal with them better, she would have to come up with a strategy, and when she wasn't being pestered by 2 giant puppets, animatronics, or whatever you call them, in the middle of a tiny room, creatures, she would message her teacher later in the afternoon. Tell her what was going on, and she would also have to ask about this part of 87. That could be important, maybe ask more about these killings, but that was for tomorrow. Right now, it was time for her to go back to the room that was being paid for and go to bed, maybe with a little snack. Due to the hectic schedule, she scarcely touched any of her snacks and declined to eat any of the junk food they were serving. Yes, that sounded good. A little dinner instead of sleep. She would be rested tomorrow, and she would use her newfound clarity to come up with a plan to deal with those 2. But first, she needed to find out why Freddy didn't become active. What was behind that curtain, according to the camera? A pirate's cove? What was that? What exactly were those things? Tomorrow, she would find out more. After all, how important could that be? She saw how popular this place was, the whole building was full, and even though it was peak time, it was very different from the night before, when everything was so dark and empty, with children running around playing games or chatting while eating ramen, others stopping in front of the stage where the bear, rabbit, and chicken would sing and perform in what she could only assume was a dance, and still others wandering across to Pirate Cove to look sorrowfully at the drawn curtains. Apparently, the kids loved those things. She stared at those objects. They were on a fairly open stage, and no one was actually there. The luminous shine of the core energy strands was also absent. Yes, they were moving independently, but she couldn't explain why voices were coming from them. Then she was told that speaker systems were in place, and that she had received a pre-recorded message. All right, that was explained. The recorded lines most likely followed a timetable as well, which is why they remained silent last night, which was advantageous. But that didn't explain how they moved or how these fairly jerky objects became ninja stealthy, and that last element was probably beyond anyone's comprehension. And what was beyond that curtain? Maybe a quick glance. Sakura? Her guide from yesterday stated over the phone. Why are you here? Are you not attempting to quit? Damn it, one of the day watchers was going to raise the curtain a bit. Nope, she said, turning back. Not that I could if I wanted to. Oh well, maybe this was a great chance to learn more. Actually, I had some questions about the animatronics. I think I heard them being called. Contracts and all that. She grinned amiably. What does that signify? And how do they move? Some of your questions are probably above my pay grade, but I will answer what I can, her guide said with a smile. Let me take a little vacation, please. Over ramen, I'll tell you. She smiled gratefully after him, and although she wasn't a big fan of ramen, it couldn't hurt to have a bowl, if only as a courtesy. The watchman was able to answer many of her questions, and the ramen wasn't terrible. It wasn't as nice as it was back home, but it wasn't awful either. That had been both fun and enlightening. An animatronic was a metal puppet with a motor of some sort that allowed it to move and activate itself. That was really interesting, but he thought that the animal's simple on-stage movements were a sign of their abilities. But it seems that they had wandered the corridors before, or had the option to do so. Then he had been vague, and she didn't follow up on the subject, but he had also explained to her how they could communicate, and she had been right, both the time switch and pre-recorded messages. It was probably a little more complicated than that, but it was Reese to know that a hunch was fundamentally right. It turns out that a fourth persona had also been decommissioned. The out of order, then. It has no intention of wandering around anytime soon. However, the conversation also raised the issue of food from outside being prohibited, so if she got hungry, she had to get something from the kitchen, and they would make sure she got something before work. This is why she had a box of rice balls on her desk now. She needed at least one hand to operate the doors, lights, and screen, and she didn't want to eat a lot of ramen like Naruto didn't. Oh, was there anything more the guy from last night had warned her about? The phone rang as she was starting to get settled. Oh, hello? Hi there. Well, kudos if you're listening to this and you've made it to day 2. Yay for me. I won't talk quite as long this time because Freddy and his friends tend to get more active as the week goes on. What? Well, watching those cameras while I speak might be a good idea just to make sure everyone is in the right place. You know. Oh no! She stopped her hand from jerking toward the screen, took a deep breath, and realized that she had a plan. She would not rely on the TV. Instead, she would concentrate, unwind, listen in the hallways, and take advantage of the lighting. She would mostly use her senses to maintain power, but sometimes she might check the screen to see if someone was stupid enough to try to break in. Despite their silence, she was a skilled ninja. Well, it's interesting to note that the bear rarely leaves the stage. However, I've heard that he becomes much more active in the dark, so I suppose that's another incentive not to run out of electricity. Yes, it was. I also want to stress how important it is to use your door lights. I wish to handle as few of them as we can. Actually, I was aware of this beforehand, but I'm still thankful. There are blind spots in your camera views, and those blind spots are directly outside of your doors. So, if you're having trouble finding someone or something on your cameras, make sure to check the door lights. There is plenty of time to react. Was he merely attempting to seem reassuring when he replied, "Well, not that you would be in any danger, of course? Also, check on the curtain in Pirate Cove from time to time." I'm not implying that. Why? The curtain is no longer in use. The character in there seems unique in that he becomes more active if the cameras remain off for long periods of time. What is it? I guess he doesn't appreciate being watched. I'm not certain. Either way, everything is under control. I'll be talking to you soon. She grabbed the screen and turned to face Pirate Cove, where a fox-like object was staring out nearly directly at the camera and the curtain was open. She shook herself out of her trance and turned over to the show stage, where she froze again as her blood cooled as she peered at the face peering out. She quickly flipped through the cameras, found the chicken and bunny, and set the screen down. No, it couldn't be that easy. Their pal was about to join in on the fun now. Oh no. Now, if only to observe this newcomer and come up with a fresh idea, she needed to utilize the screen. Her heart was pounding. She thought it would be easy. Simply pay attention to the two obnoxious ones and respond appropriately. She grabbed a rice ball, inhaled deeply, and then bit it. She had to settle down. She swallowed, then turned back to Pirate Cove to see that nothing had changed. Excellent. Setting the screen aside, she directed her core force towards her ears. It was nice that she didn't pick up anything from either hall. This was in case she looked at both lights and couldn't find anything. She let out a sigh of relief only then. All right, just keep moving. It shouldn't be too challenging. If it was a fox, simply check on it using the tablet. For the other two, utilize her lights and ears. It ought to be simple. She was capable of doing that. In order to enhance her hearing throughout the night, she might use her control to direct a tiny amount of core energy onto her ears. This would allow her to detect the faint indications of their silent footsteps and hear them approaching down the corridor. In the event that she got sidetracked, that would ensure the lights were present and save battery life for a brief check on the fox. She could make up for her current power usage deficit. The animals were quiet, but not quiet enough, and she only had to shut each door once. But those doors were noisy, and the muffled sound was a bit too pleasant for her, so she had to exercise caution. The fox had moved to the shadows in front of the curtains about an hour ago, and he seemed to be studying the camera, waiting, and of course, no one had broken in. She picked up the screen and swiftly looked at the fox and the rest of the screen. She lowered the screen, reclined in her chair, and grabbed another rice ball after realizing she only had 48% left. This was no longer as awful. She was in her zone, she knew what to do, and her plan was working rather well, but she was still paranoid and yes, there was still a risk that something would try to kill her. Even if they became more aggressive, she would be allowed to return home if she could keep doing this for a few days. She picked up the screen once more after finishing the small morsel. It's time for another update on Fox. It was wise to fast inspect one room to conserve electricity. She nearly dropped the screen when she brought up Pirate Cave. They all wandered, so it wasn't too awful that the fox was gone. She swiftly scrolled through the cameras in search of it, and this time she noticed it rushing directly at her in the west. She slapped the door release, causing the door to clunk shut, after her core energy-powered ears detected the sounds of heavy footfalls moving at incredible speeds, not ninja speeds, but definitely near. The footfall grew louder, then a screech, then the footsteps stopped and seemed to shift to a skidding sound, and then something big and heavy hit the door with speed and power. She jumped and peered at the door. The quick footsteps stopped for a few seconds, then started up again, this time away from the door. Sakura took a few long breaths and swallowed before checking the lights and unlocking the door. Okay, he was truly gone. Hold on, she was experiencing déjà vu. She swiftly spun around and pressed the door light on the opposite side, but nothing happened. Oh well, alright. The fox was back behind the curtain, but it was open when she bent down to pick it up and see how it was doing. She couldn't help but notice that he appeared to be dissatisfied. No, it must have been a trick of her mind. Yes, she needed to watch that fox carefully. All he needed to do was stand out from the others and be loud. She quickly lowered the TV when she heard a sound she definitely didn't want to hear. She heard quiet, slow footsteps approaching a pincer from both sides of the corridor. Normally one came down first, but this time they had not fallen down simultaneously. She didn't care if it was a coincidence. Without initially checking the lights, she waited for the footfall to stop directly in front of the doors before slamming them both down. She swallowed a lump in her throat while watching Pirate Cove's film. Wow, both doors used a lot of power, but he hadn't moved. She still had excess, but. She grabbed the bottle of water she carried with her and took a deep swallow, then reached for a rice ball and found the box was empty. Really? The previous evening, she didn't even touch her meal. Now, she just devoured her stores. That's why she brought the food in the first place. She heard the bunny leave since it usually seemed to come from the left. When she checked the light after opening the door, nothing was there. The chicken was still staring at her when she checked the light on her right, so she let go of it and grimaced. She reasoned that it must have been the stress, that she had more time to eat than she had the night before, that she had more time to think about eating because she wasn't in a panic, and that maybe she should order a bigger box the next time. This was extremely hungry work for some reason. The latter was going to draw out a storage full of emergency supplies, such as explosive tags, kunai, ninja wire, military medications, and food, which she pulled out of her pocket. The corporation would not want her to have these materials in the building. Not wanting the fox bum to rush again, she pulled out a bag of nuts and searched Pirate Cove again. She was startled and started blinking. As she turned to see if the chicken was there, she swore and glanced at her power. He wasn't decommissioned, but it wasn't either. His talk shouldn't even be set to play at this late hour, much less be on a timer. But the song was off-key, so she opened the door. She had a reserve because of this, but ugh, she was really using it up. It had nevertheless been unexpected for such things. She might want to inquire about it, but first she would need to make sure she rationed her power appropriately in order to survive the night. However, she had a good plan that now appeared to be reliable, so this shouldn't be too hard. She could still hear the rabbit and chicken visiting, and by the conclusion of her shift, she had only 10% of her power remaining. Her new plan appeared to be the greatest one. All she had to do was refine it and follow it for the rest of the week. Her lack of nourishment was going to be a problem, but she had plenty of power. Along with the fact that the back room was very warm, she could also need to make sure she had plenty of drink because less panicked but high stress would probably continue to produce more hunger and thirst. Those were tomorrow's ideas. Sakura was still in disbelief as she observed the animatronics singing and dancing. Right now, all three of them were moving erratically, and each movement was accompanied by a slight squeak from their inside organs. She had never seen them walk down the hallways, but she was sure that their motions were much smoother than this, even though their movements seemed to be very restricted. She also knew that they could be considerably quieter. Furthermore, the fox, which was meant to be immobile, was able to run and sing with ease. The bear was always in the back, the chicken liked going into the kitchen, the fox bolted, and the rabbit stayed to the left and the supply closet. Why? Whatever they termed it, it had to have been something in their programming. Maybe she should spend some time getting to know them. They were all supposed to have personalities. She would presume that they were concealing their potential if she didn't know any better, but from whom? And why? Indeed, how were they able to? You mean they weren't alive? She refused to answer that question. She thought about approaching the day watchman who had been her guide, but she felt that he wouldn't be able to help her much on this topic because he had already helped her a lot. He did explain to her how they operated, but he didn't appear to give a damn about their personalities or their intended identities. Glancing around the once crowded ramen palace, she realized that her only other alternative would be to rely on the patrons, both young and old. She needed to remember to pick up an extra large order of rice balls even though she had plenty of time before her shift. That had been instructive, since she had learned a little bit more about the personalities of her metal opponents. To the children's yells and enthusiasm, the fox started his performance by sprinting from his location in Pirate Cove to the eating area. He was stopped by the parents because they felt he was too eerie or frightening for the children, and it didn't help that he had several exposed metal pieces. Ironically, the youngsters adored him despite his exposed bits. Initially, it would appear that a pirate was a bandit who traveled by boat rather than by land. The others were much more obvious. The chicken was a party girl. Yes, it was portrayed as a she, who loved to eat, sing, dance, and have fun. The bunny was a caregiver and safety advocate, primarily cleaning up messes, ensuring the stage was clear, and making sure the instruments were in tune, among other things. These details made it simple to comprehend their travels and the rationale behind their stays in specific rooms. Furthermore, from what she could tell, the bear was the band's leader and announcer, informing attendees of the party's locations and the start time of one of the acts. She might have thought that he was in charge of scheduling all the acts and ensuring the others did, which could explain why he hadn't pursued her, if she hadn't learned that everything was programmed. He could have easily induced her to waste power if the warning she had received the previous evening had been true. Aside from all of that, there had been a second generation of these devices, and the ones that were currently in use had been swapped out for ones that were more hygienic, kid-friendly, and mobile. As it turns out, the ones that were present had been modified to include a vixen that was meant to take the place of the fox when the newer models and the setting they featured in were destroyed. It had not been nearly as well liked as its male equivalent, and it seemed to have been abandoned to the mercy of vicious children to do with as they pleased. She hoped that since all of the new models had vanished as of right now, the building would not be close by. With a sigh, she took a seat, set 2 bottles of water and a large box of rice balls on the desk, and picked up the screen. She checked to be sure nothing had moved, then sat back in the chair and let out a small sigh. It would just be her second night wearing it, but she had a plan, so unless something serious happened, it should still work. Unless she guessed incorrectly, the phone should ring at around. We have it there. The telephone started ringing. Hey, hi! You're doing fantastic. Most people don't last this long. Is that the case? It hasn't been all that bad. I mean, you know, they usually move on to other things by now. I'm not implying that they died. That's not what I meant. Okay. Indeed it isn't. Anyway, I'd better not take up too much of your time. Things start getting real tonight. Bring it with you. Hey, listen, here's my idea. If you get caught and don't want to be put in a Freddy suit, try going limp and acting like you're dead. That way, there's a chance that they might think you're just an empty costume instead, but if they do, they might try to stuff a metal skeleton into you. I wonder how that would work. Well, whatever, ignore that. It's better to stay out of trouble. I'll let you take care of it. I'll see you over there. She wasn't sure how she felt about that last part. On the one hand, it sounded like bad advice that wouldn't do much to improve her situation, but on the other, it sounded like he had tried it before. Based on the way he phrased it, if he was still alive, he would have succeeded. When it was 6, those things did seem to go. Maybe it would save her precious minutes or seconds, but maybe the best thing to do was just to stay out of sight. She let out another sigh and turned to face her charges. The fox was still behind the curtains. Great. The chicken and the bunny were gone. Well, that was to be expected. But the bear was still standing there, staring at the camera. Wait a minute. She looked back at the TV and blinked. Yes, its eyes were on the camera. That was unsettling for sure. She flipped back to the pirate and put the screen down, her ears already getting core energy. She didn't intend to stare at something new again. That was a waste of power. She couldn't do that. No more. That's not how they would surprise her. She reached out and picked up a ball of rice. The night would be long, but she was ready. She was taking a bite when she heard movement to her right. Were they already beginning to move? Oh. She looked at the screen to see if the chicken would really be a threat, but the fox wasn't feeling very excited, as he was still hidden behind his drapes. She nodded to herself and lowered the screen, then took another mouthful of rice before closing the door on her right and avoiding the robotic chicken that was standing just outside. This was getting easy. What could possibly go wrong now? Sakura looked at the screen again, crossed her legs, and squeezed. there stood that blasted fox in the shadows, just waiting. There was a problem, and it was 4 in the morning. She still had plenty of water and rice balls, but her problem stemmed from the fact that she had been consuming more of both than she had the day before. She didn't think she could last 2 hours, and she really wanted to go to the bathroom, so she put the screen down and tried to focus on something other than her bladder. She took deep, steady breaths and pinched her thighs once more, but it wasn't working. The fox had already rushed her once before and was preparing for the next run. The other 2 had also been very busy, knocking on her door repeatedly, but there hadn't been any activity for the last 30 minutes or so. They seemed far away. This made her a little more nervous. Her bladder, which already needed treatment from all the water she had been drinking to fight the heat and wash down all those rice balls, disliked that building. If anything, like the fox, was waiting for her when she left. She didn't want to risk coming back to find an ambush. She didn't want to leave the room with something. The first might be a problem, but the second didn't seem to be. But since the fox didn't stay, it was able to enter, realize she wasn't there, and then go looking for her. She took another breath. She was impatient. That was exactly the risk she would have to take. She took another breath and slowly got up from her seat. Then, using her inner energy, she crouched to stay close to the wall as she walked up it and onto the ceiling. Yes, that was very painful for her bladder, but it also helped to relieve some of the strain. Although leaving the security room was probably dangerous, maybe being on the ceiling would lessen the threat. Despite her body's natural tendency to accelerate, she moved slowly enough to be able to keep an eye out for any lurkers in the hallway as she practically crawled down the inverted surface. As it was, she had no trouble descending from her perch and going into the bathroom, and she was so eager to get into a stall that she hadn't even thought about sealing the door or a mechanism to keep it closed in case someone wanted to enter after her. It wasn't until a few minutes after she had calmed down, washed her hands, finished her task, and freshened up a bit that she looked at the bathroom door and regretted it. Well, it was much too late to be worried about it now, and if they were nearby, they would surely know where she was. Shaking her head, she started up the wall close to the entrance, taking care to grab the handle and start opening it as she went. When she got to the ceiling, she made sure to let go of the top of the door and slide through. Keeping her eyes and ears open for any sign of danger, she started to crawl down the hallway, allowing the door to close on its own. She thought she might have dreamed it, but her instincts told her to double-check, so she looked over her shoulder and twisted slightly. Her attention was drawn to the faintest of whispers, and a few yards away, she heard the faintest of sounds, like a leaf dropping on the grass, but the sound was much closer than that. She was about to turn around and go again, but nothing caught her attention, only the dim hallway and the restroom. Her instincts told her something that her head didn't, and she was about to go again when she noticed 2 gleams of light in the shadows, almost in the middle of the hallway, too high up for a logical source. As she watched, an outline appeared in the shadows, a broad outline, a shape that was familiar, and she was sure that if she wasn't upside down, her face would lose all its color and blood. The bear was the culprit, and she was a few steps away from the bear, which was out, and she almost missed it even with core energy enhanced hearing. Then a jingle started to play as it moved toward her. Without hesitation, she leaped from the ceiling and ran for her life, moving at speeds that a normal civilian couldn't expect to reach by applying all of her training and transferring core energy to her legs. Before making her way to safety, she rushed to the door and looked over her shoulder to see how her pursuer was doing. She could still see the bear's dark outline as it approached her steadily and far more quickly than she had anticipated, eating up a lot of distance, not that it was traveling quickly. Then she remembered the object's size, which suggested that it had both a long stride and a long reach. She ran through the opening, pushed the button to shut it behind her, exhaled a sigh of relief, pushed her back against the thick slab of metal, and started to pant as her knees buckled. But she wasn't tired or exhausted, she wasn't nearly as angry as that, no more. No, this was a result of tension and mild anxiety. All of her plans, preparations, and safety precautions had been in vain just moments before, even though she knew what to look for and what to listen for. She thought she knew what to expect, but they would always throw the next shuriken in an arc just when she thought she understood. It took her a few minutes to calm down. No, everything was fine. The bear was particularly quiet, a little more vitality. It's just a hassle, not like it would be a huge drain. Particularly because the doors were already noisy, but that wouldn't be a major problem. She was positive that she had heard it go, and she had already started to do so. She carefully stood up, pressed the light switch, and saw that there was no image or shadow in the window. She opened the door and checked again, sighing. She whirled around and hit the button for the left-hand light. Clearly. She picked up the screen and went to Pirate Cove. Were the curtains closed? Oh, the fox was singing a very gloomy song, too. It was more dejected than depressed. If she didn't know any better, she would be sorry that she wasn't there when it rushed in here, but if it really meant to kill her. God, she needed a rice ball badly. She sank into her chair and shook her head, taking a deep breath through her nose before bending over to pick up one of her last pieces. But she was stopped when she smelled something warm, salty, and delicious. Her eyes went to where the rice balls should have been, only to find something else there instead. Where were her rice balls, and how had a bowl of steamy ramen ended up on her desk? How did this occur? The animatronics were supposed to be the only ones present with her. Getting a bowl of ramen from the kitchen and putting it on the desk neatly didn't seem like one of those things, even though she had seen them move and was confident they could accomplish a lot. In addition, she hadn't been gone for very long. It would have been impossible for them to come here, notice that she was gone, decide to modify her meal, go to the kitchen, prepare or at least reheat it, and then bring it back here before removing the items that were already on the desk when she came back. No manner was possible. There was no explanation either. They would do it, but why? It was illogical. Unless they were attempting to set her up and they were far cleverer than she gave them credit. She needed at least one hand to protect herself, and ramen needed two. In addition, you had to focus entirely on the ramen to avoid it spreading and burning you. Was that it? Was this a ruse? Or was she just overanalyzing the situation? Her stomach growled a little. How could she possibly be hungry right now? She groaned as she looked at the clock and saw that she had about 1.5 hours remaining. She groaned again, made sure her ears were getting enough core energy, got another Fox update, and then picked up the owl of ramen to start processing it. You shouldn't waste resources, but she was hungry. Her charges had behaved well, but by the time she clocked out, her nerves were tense. The bear hadn't even come near her again, the fox had barely shown his face, and seriously had barely moved down the corridors. Maybe she didn't hear him approach, but she would have, wouldn't she? Oh no! She would need to be extra careful. In the case of that damned bear, time things, listen carefully, and perhaps pay a little more attention to cameras. No, she needed to reconsider how much water she drank. Setting down her package of rice balls and water bottle, Sakura swore to herself as she dashed inside the security office, looked at the desk clock, and sighed with relief before cursing yet another choice. She had been thinking about the bear and its ninja-like stealth all the time, and she had been unable to fall asleep after that stupid bear nearly forced her back to the apartment, and when she did, it was a restless sleep that left her still sleeping in. She had gone over a number of scenarios and backup plans, and she was positive she had a few things, but she had nearly been late to work while trying to think of them. Thank you, once had been enough. She didn't really care. It was an unattractive job that paid much less than it should. No, she was furious because she really didn't want to be caught in the dark in the hallways again. She just needed to relax and take a few deep breaths because she was already uptight, for crying out loud. She had a few minutes before. She nearly jumped out of her chair and onto the floor when the phone rang. Hey, hi. Hello? Wow, it's day 4. What was he talking about when he said, hey, listen, I might not be around to send you a message tomorrow? What was that sound like? A banging? It's been a bad night here for me. Thank you very much. I knew you could do it. Wait a minute. No, you're not serious. I'm kind of happy that I recorded my messages for you, when I did. Hey, please do me a favor. Would you be able to look inside those suits in the rear room sometime? Until someone checks, I'm going to try to wait. It might not be that horrible. I've often wondered what was going through all those empty heads back there. You are aware of? Oh no. She listened to the last moments of a man's life throughout it all, sitting there in paralyzed stillness after hearing his final request, the knowledge too much for her mind to process for a few moments, and then the panic struck when it did. Near the end, you could hear the bear playing that melody, that jingle, and then there was an ethereal scream. The phone then went static before cutting off. They had him, a man who had endured them far longer than she had, and who was aware of their tricks. They had persisted, they were now aware, and they had won. How could she? Honestly, what could she do to stop them all that the man on the phone couldn't? She was met with resistance at every turn, and her destiny was predetermined. Horrible! She slapped herself hard and took a deep breath, realizing that she couldn't panic, that she needed to calm down, that she had backup plans, that they couldn't deny anything, and that she needed to check the cameras and unwind. Picking up the handheld device and cursing again, she quickly checked on Pirate Cove and saw the fox peeking out from behind the curtains. Backstage came next, and all she could see was Freddy staring back at her as if to let her know that she was next. They had already dealt with one night guard, so now they would deal with number 2. No, she wouldn't let them. After giving the animal a fierce look, she put the screen down, her ears already sharpened, and even though it didn't come near, she could hear movement down the hallway, which made her feel even more at ease. She looked at a ball of rice she was holding and used only her core energy, and one thought to make it float above her hand. Then she had another idea, and it started spinning like a leaf in the academy. All she had to do was relax and stay relaxed. By 2 o'clock, she was feeling better, and everything had returned to how it had been for the past few nights. She didn't check the back room when the bear left because she didn't think it was necessary, and she was positive that she would listen to him if he showed up. The fox was now standing in the shadows, and the chicken and bunny had already taken a few chances, but it was okay because the trick had been her ears. She was certain that they would continue doing it. Then she heard it. The smallest whisper. Quiet footsteps that showed nothing. The bear was coming. She heard him too. She turned to her right and smiled. He couldn't ambush her. He was hers. He would be barred out like everyone else. Then the sound ceased. She was positive it was down the hall. How could he go? Suddenly that dumb melody started playing, and she winced. Why would he do that? He was pretty good at being stealthy. Why would he ruin that with music that is so superfluous? She shook her head and looked at the door for 30 seconds before shrugging and returning to her work. It would be easier to hear him coming, at least. She looked at the pirate before frowning. All right, he has to decline that. Oh gosh, it's so loud that I can't even hear myself. With a horrible realization, she quickly went to her right, flipped on the light, and stared at the chicken in the doorway, praying she was wrong. She forcefully shut the door. Turning left, she looked at the door light, and the bunny looked down at her. She slammed that door, too. She relaxed in her chair, trying to prevent herself from hyperventilating. Her most valuable resource, her hearing, had been made useless, and she had no other options. She extracted the core energy from her ears, rendering them useless. The bear's motivation for staying on stage was now clear. He looked like the headmaster of Team 7 from the 6th. The others were his Genin or Chunin squad, and he was the Jonin. He observed them as they went out and attempted to capture her, learned about her habits, and then acted to take advantage of them. She was up against an experienced squad that was skilled at coordinating attacks, not outdated animatronics, and she felt panic again. She would have to employ her old methods again. Try to predict their movements with the cameras. It was a futile strategy, but it seemed to be her only choice. A huge explosion to her left jolted her out of her scared trance. The fox had moved her. How long had she been holding both doors down, my God? She checked the lights, took another quick glance at them, and then saw the strength of Pirate Cove. 40%, oh no, not 38, and it was 3. Whoa! Did she have a chance? She swiftly scanned the camera to locate each animatronic. The background was still filled with that jingle. Would she make it through the night? Is 38% enough? There was nothing else to do. After wiping sweat from her forehead, Sakura automatically went for a rice ball, only to be told that she had already run out. This time, she didn't even swear, just returned her attention to the television in front of her. 3%. She looked at the cameras, but she wasn't near them. The fox was behind his curtains. 2%. The music stopped only after she put the screen down, and she reluctantly put core energy back into her ears, but heard nothing. She gulped and turned back to the camera. 1%. She put down the screen and glanced to her right, wondering if she was experiencing hallucinations or if something had caught in her ears. She glanced at the light on the door. Then it got dark. Power is at 0%. All of her preparations and safety precautions had been futile, and she did the only thing she could think of in despair as her eyes widened and she wondered, how much time was left? What had happened to the animatronics? She relaxed in her seat and shut her eyes. Her chest made minimal movements as she attempted to control her breathing, and she focused core energy into her ear to detect any movement that might be approaching. She needed to give herself some time. Timely minutes, precious seconds. At exactly 6 o'clock, they always left her alone. All she could hope for was that nothing would change. She didn't know how long she stayed like this in the dark, in the silence, but eventually she heard it. The sound that made her blood freeze, the sweet, calming sound of footsteps, meaningful, steady, and slow. At the door, they paused, and she could tell that it was moving somewhere, possibly the head, by the faint, delicate whirring, which also stopped quickly. Keep quiet. Everything fell silent again, and she struggled to take slow, even breaths. The bear might go once it learned she is not moving. It would take time even if it went to receive a metal skeleton. She was in desperate need of time. She nearly screamed and yelled when the jingle started playing, but she was able to control it. Really, what business thought that kids cheering was a smart way to signal the end of a shift? She didn't question that tonight. The music continued, then the alarm went off, and then the music stopped. She opened her eyes, listened carefully, and quickly adjusted to the darkness. Nothing was there, she was safe, she was successful, and she let go of a breath she had been holding without realizing it. God forbid, she made it through another night. She had to know more about the murders that are discussed, more about the history of this site, why this place had previously closed so frequently, and most importantly, what had happened to the man who left all those messages on her phone. She had to see what had happened to him for herself, not to disclose it. Ultimately, whether she did or not was irrelevant. Still, they would wait. No, she was helping him out. Because he had hoped that someone would discover him. Sakura needed clarification. Rather than screaming in terror when she saw the fox, she was sneaking into Pirate Cove and hiding behind the drapes because she knew where to begin looking. That is, if her suspicion that these things were cruelly humorous was correct, which she was quite certain of. It really ought to have. But it wasn't working because it was still daylight, which was good. All right, just go around to the back of it now. Look for, there we are. Crack it open and. God, oh God. Yes, there was a body inside. Oh my God, judging by the look of the blood and the few identifiable parts, the corpse has been dead for less than 24 hours. He was this man. She had been right. Only because she had been training under 5th headmaster was it possible for her to close the suit and leave. Only because she had been the 5th headmaster's apprentice for a year had she been able to keep her composure while walking through the restaurant. Only because she had been in the therapeutic program for 2 years had she been able to enter the restroom, locate a stall, lock the door, and kneel in front of the toilet before emptying her stomach. It had been many terrible minutes before she could even think about getting up from her knees and flushing the toilet, and then she went to the sink to try to wash as much of the vomit taste out of her mouth as she could. It had been a terrible sight. The head went completely to paste, and the body twisted. She hoped it had been short, but if not, the thought made her cringe. She needed to be extra careful. That might have been her last night, and tonight it might be her. She rested her weight on the sink. That was not how she could think. She would die as a result of a self-fulfilling prophecy caused by that line of thinking. She steadied herself and turned to the door. She had to get back to the world. She had to learn as much as she could about the reality. Perhaps it wouldn't help, but she had to know. It had to be someone. Sakura stumbled into the office, nearly spilling her water bottle and package of rice balls on the desk before slamming into the chair. She was jittery, emotionally and intellectually exhausted, and unfit to be there, but here she was, still reeling from the sobering reality she had learned. It was all about the children, dead children. As if that weren't terrible enough, the second generation of robots was released, and the perpetrator, who was believed to be the same person, attacked again, killing more children in spite of the increased security. Then came the infamous bite episode, in which an animatronic bit a guard and severed their frontal lobe, but that didn't explain why they attacked guards, except for a small detail she had been told. By the end of the second generation's existence, when they were all free to roam the hallways during the day, they had started to look at adults suspiciously, but they were still happy around the children, and every child had been killed at night. Did they think? The phone did, in fact, ring, but that was not possible. The man was dead, and she could see the devastation to his body. He could not have. It was made worse by the fact that the phone's speakers were mute, just jumbled nonsense. The machines had not only caught him, but they had also recorded it. Oh God, the cameras! Fox was watching, so she picked up the screen, and the back room was devoid of them all. Panic struck as she started to look through the cameras, and when that awful song started playing, she found the rabbit and the chicken. She went to the door on her right, so taken aback that she dropped the screen into her lap, and the bear was ready. She swallowed the knot in her throat and was about to turn around when she saw something, and as she went much more to her right, she shouted, seeing a slouched bear with a yellowish tinge standing in front of her, its gaping lips and eyeless sockets staring into her soul. She raised the screen in front of her face in a desperate attempt to defend herself against any assaults that did not happen, and as she carefully lowered the little device, she saw an empty room. She sighed with satisfaction when instinct told her to check the door lights on her right, but she froze when a terrified hand struck the door release, securing the chicken away from her person, as could be seen from a glance to her left. Her palm trembled as she grabbed for what was quickly becoming her comfort food. What had that been? That golden bear. How had it been here? Why had it left? What was going on? Fantastic, just fantastic. Just what she didn't need. Another piece of the huge puzzle. One more thing to be mindful of. She took a bite of her lunch and chewed it slowly, checking the door lights on both sides before letting the door on the right rise. She swallowed and glanced at the screen again, but it didn't matter. She had to be vigilant, she had to live through this. They didn't catch her, she had too much to do, she wouldn't die in a kid's ramen castle. When 3 o'clock rolled around, she started to get anxious because she had nearly ran out of rice balls and water and realized how much she hated the cameras. In addition to being inefficient in terms of electricity consumption, they also left her feeling powerless and useless. She couldn't stop asking questions, but she could see where they were, and sometimes it was hard to tell if she missed something in her desperate search through the screens to save electricity, or if it was simply outside her door. Her intuition, the same intuition that has been far more helpful to her than the fucking cameras, told her not to worry about it. That strange bear had not reappeared, and I was afraid I was missing something. It was nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was no indication that it had ever been real. It was illogical. Not a single one. At the same time, the same impulses started screaming at her. She punched the light button with a practiced motion and shaky fingers, but nothing happened. She became pale. She pressed the button again. Nothing. Nothing. No, no, no! The light wasn't working. Why? Panic started to build inside of her. It didn't matter. Close the door now and worry about it later. She pressed the door button with her palm, but it didn't work as well. That's when her panic broke out. No, 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 no. She leaped from her seat and started to back away from the open door, recognizing the chicken's silhouette in the dimly lit hallway. She didn't know how the door had been sabotaged, but she took another step back, complained, and first ran into something solid. It took a few moments for her terrified mind to realize that she was standing in front of the left doorway and that the item she was pressing against was neither a door nor a wall. She was about to look down when she saw a large purple arm wrapped around her torso from behind. The headmaster of Godane wished she could have some sake, not for the first time since she started, and by few, she meant a few bottles that she could down in one sitting. The fifth headmaster sighed for the 10th time as he went over the reports from that horror of a C rank. The last mission had been a complete failure. She hadn't just sent one of her ninja to spend time in that hellhole, which would have made things worse. There, she'd sent a girl to whom she'd started to feel a connection, a girl who was basically forced to accept the role even though she hadn't wanted to go. She'd hunted guards, she killed children, she had an animatronic killer, items, complicated tales and rumors. A business that seemed to be only concerned with staying afloat. Sakura. Is this everything? She asked, dismissing the thought with a shake of her head. She was acting very professionally, probably to hide her emotions, and her assistant replied, Yes, it's all the information that could be gathered at this time. The fifth headmaster hated this part of ninja life. You would think with this being major knowledge that the place would be shut down for good and the things melted into scrap. She exhaled. They truly aren't to blame. They are merely carrying out their duties. However, I acknowledge that the company's incompetence warrants its closure. What? Even after you would stand up for them? With a sigh and a sorrowful grin, her student interrupted her, saying, Yes, I would, because someone has to. Teacher, I understand how you feel, she said. I genuinely do. You must realize, nevertheless, that some things are beyond our control. Kindly read the report's final page from beginning to end. It will clarify everything, she said calmly. When she looked at her second student's form and turned to the final page of the reports, her eyes softened and her anger subsided. Very well, Sakura, came out of her mouth as she took a deep breath before starting to read. The summoner of slugs swallowed her rage, longing again to drink a lot of the much-needed sake. The oversized bunny was holding her in what would be called a bridal carry, its large arm encircling her tightly, holding her arms and legs firmly in place, and Sakura didn't yell, or perhaps it would have been better to say that she couldn't, because the fear of what was happening had dulled her consciousness. It wasn't the same reason she struggled, and she probably couldn't have, even if she'd been in the right frame of mind. The only sign that something had happened to her is that she hasn't sent or returned a letter on time, leaving it to fester. However, she wasn't thinking about that. Instead, it was focused on a single idea. It was all going to end like this. Inside a suit, the head went to the paste, the body is forced to bend and twist in strange ways. Her friends wouldn't be able to see her, she wouldn't be able to continue her friendly rivalry with Ino, she wouldn't be able to welcome Naruto back from his training trip or help him bring his companion back. All of her plans would come to an end, and she would die. All of that medical training would be in vain. A bowl of hot ramen is placed in front of her while she sits in a chair in the dining room. She looked owlishly at the bowl of food as her brain attempted to reset. This isn't possible. This must have been some kind of a ploy. Her mind was giving her a nice thought to think about before the last moments. Maybe the ramen was poisoned to keep her from writhing when she was loaded into her animal-shaped tomb. Or maybe the voice of her host and deadliest nemesis. "Congrats, little lady, for winning 4 nights in a row," jolted her out of her daydream. She glanced toward the stage, where the bear, the rabbit, and the chicken were all in their right places, tools were ready, and the bear's instrument was basically a microphone. "It was a great game," she said, finding the wording intriguing. It barely registered that he wasn't meant to talk. She heard the bear refer to his audience as little ladies and little gents on multiple occasions during the day. The bear's audience was, of course, mostly children. Hold on. While you enjoy a well-earned lunch, the band and I would like to play some tunes to honor your accomplishment. The bear continued. But before that, there is someone who has been very eager to see you. Celebrate? However, she was supposed to perish when apprehended. He mentioned a game, but the loud clanking sounds of heavy metal boots running filled the room, and she turned just in time to see the large fox running toward her. She wanted to scream, but as the massive robot that resembled a fox suddenly stopped and took what was probably meant to be a very attractive stance, her fear quickly gave way to confusion. Her brain tried to reset again as it tried to comprehend the situation. What was going on? Hold on, the fox used to come out into the dining room to entertain the children. She was sure that the fox, with its sagging jaw, would smile if it could, and this belief was reinforced by the way its tail started to wag from side to side. Her hands started clapping and working instinctively. Sakura, despite herself, grinned a little as it rose up straight and made a grand gesture with its hooked hand, saying, "You be right quick with that door lock." It made a dramatic bow and said, "Yar, so we finally be meetin', lass. I'm sure you're afraid of opening yourself up to the best sea fox ever to set sail. I'm not shocked that my reputation comes before me. As the landlubbing band warms up, I will tell you one of my greatest stories as a prize for your quick wit. Are you okay with it, Captain?" The bear said, "Go right ahead, we will back you up." The rabbit jokingly said, "If you haven't gotten rusty." "I'll show you, Rusty. Simply play your strings." They were treating her like a child, and she was a child when they saw her, so Sakura couldn't help but laugh. This sealed it. With the whole gang, it was like one of the day's shows. She was sure, though, that the lines weren't at all like what was programmed in them, but who said they couldn't use word banks and rewrite phrases to create new sentences, given everything else they could do? If her suspicion that they were killing guards to protect children was true, they wouldn't purposefully harm her as long as they saw her as a child. Normally, she would be incensed about this because she thought she was growing into a really attractive woman and was a ninja, but now she had no intention of complaining. Using that logic, she listened as the others played background music effects and the pirate related a story about one of his invented experiences, and she couldn't help but laugh or open her eyes in amazement as she ate her bowl of ramen, finding the group's unity amazing, more like watching a group of friends having fun than watching a group of puppets perform a set routine, and they showed some coordination as they tried to get her. But the way they played off each other, and how every now and then one of the three on stage, mostly the bunny, would interrupt with a witty remark that only served to further the plot or heighten the humor of it all. The band started their portion of her little celebration after the story ended, and by the time the ramen was done, she was just enjoying the absurdity of it all. Everything was happening even though it didn't make sense, so she decided to push the boundaries if this was how things were going to be. "So you wished to challenge me, lass? I was rewarded for taking a risk, even though I wasn't sure if he would understand the significance." She glanced at the attractive pirate who was shouting, "Dums," in time with the song, then put her arm on the table, bending it 45 degrees and pressing her elbow into the wooden surface. If she hadn't known any better, she would have thought there was a tone of sincere enjoyment in its voice. "Yes, it is a problem. But that was impossible." That was the extent of her willingness. It went to where she was standing, pushed aside the chairs that were not made to support it, and positioned its arm to match hers, and they clasped hands and gazed down at each other, its hands slightly bigger than hers, and for some reason, looking into that one eye didn't scare her nearly as much as she had expected. They started at an unheard signal, and even though she couldn't hear it, she was positive that the devices in his arm were buzzing. She gave her arm all of her strength, everything she knew about the fifth headmaster's super strength technique, and the arm barely moved at all. She frowned at it, hoping that the method would be more than enough, but then she started to feel pressure from the arm she was fighting. It started out slowly, with her arm trembling as she attempted to keep up the little progress she had made, but it continued, and she gradually lost ground. The loss wasn't sudden and humiliating. She had stopped her slow descent a few times before more pressure was applied, but in the end, her hand was dragged down to the wooden surface with a firm thump. "Arr, that be a good try, lass," the sea fox said, flexing his arm. "Ye be strong, but I be stronger." Sakura couldn't help but smile despite how easy she lost. The fox straightened up and nodded as she replied, "Thank you." She turned back to the stage, where the band was playing their best song. It was a really childish song, but it was full of excitement. She had never heard anything like that. She looked at her arm, and although the effort and fight had left a dull pain, it was almost divine. It was the empty bowl that once held the most delicious dish of ramen she had ever tasted. Despite the strange setting, I still felt that this shouldn't have been possible. For a very long time, this was likely going to be the best night of her life. She was still alive. She had to return to the office, but before she left the dining room, she bowed to them, a bow of polite gratitude, to the thing that had shown her kindness and a good time, that had given her a new perspective on life and the motivation to go farther. But great things do come to an end. The music had to end. The pirate had to return to his cove with more dramatic posturing and a lot of witty remarks. The fifth headmaster looked up at the report, which sounded too sweet to be real. "Really? Only because they believed you to be a youngster are you still alive?" "I realize it sounds strange. However, it's the only explanation that makes sense given all the information. It's also the reason I shouldn't revisit that post. Not too many more times, anyhow. How old is too old is a mystery to me. Because my body evolved to fit my age, I might look too old in a month or two." "Who said anyone was going back there? I'm going to do something to get that place shut down." "Such a place. It should not exist," said the fifth headmaster, brimming with righteous indignation. Sakura said calmly, "I know how you feel, teacher, but it won't help. Consider it. My own word is the only one we have that the animatronics are killing people. Will anyone believe that? In addition, the general public is aware that killings have occurred there or nearby, and it is nonetheless well liked by both adults and children. Your attempts to shut it down would only cause them to seek assistance from another hamlet or resume recruiting regular people from the streets, which will result in fatalities." She didn't particularly love it, but her apprentice's argument made some sense, so the fifth headmaster buried her head in her hands and moaned to herself. "Then what do we do?" "We continued to send ninjas. the younger-looking Chunin and the more accomplished Genin. They must have the appearance of a young teen or youngster. They will regard it like a game as long as they appear young enough, and if they do well enough, they will reward anybody we send. We can even provide a more comprehensive briefing to those we send, explaining the risks and the majority of the behaviors without assuring them that it is ultimately safe. After that, we can use it as a kind of training and test. Sakura was staring at the fifth headmaster, who asked, "Why would you support this? She had just made a proposal." "Teacher, only 2 people have a chance of surviving that place, a very skilled adult that can either outsmart the machines, or keep up a transformation for days at a time with no one, not even the machines seeing them as an adult, or a younger ninja who will suffer far less penalties if caught. However, shouldn't we at least inform them of the safety net?" Perplexing the female Sannin, Sakura grinned a little and said, "It wouldn't be much of a test or training if they knew there were no penalties, right? In addition, there's another reason. My entire world brightened when they threw me a party instead of killing me, even though I had believed with all my heart that I was going to die after being caught. I was given another chance. I might improve. I could do better. I might survive. I want them to do it without being aware of the safety net because of this. It's truly eye-opening when you feel like death is going to swallow you whole. Both the troublemakers and the talented prodigies will benefit from that experience, in a setting that will guarantee their survival." The fifth headmaster was amazed by the pinkhead's emotion in her voice. "Sakura, you sound like a fanatic. Are you certain you're all right?" "Yes, I am. I apologize. I'm simply relieved, thankful, and a little sad for those things. Even though they are so adored throughout the day, it seems as though they must conceal their true selves. It may sound absurd, but that's exactly how it feels. How I wish you could see and comprehend, teacher." "Very well," the fifth headmaster murmured, squinting her eyes carefully as she stared into nothingness. "I'll give it some thought. However, I make no promises." Sakura bowed after noticing the dismissal, saying, "Thank you, I understand. I'm going to the hospital to check whether Shizen needs assistance." She would have to see it to believe it, judging from what she'd read in the article and heard from Sakura. But the blonde waved her away and waited for the younger girl to leave before pulling a bottle and a cup of sake out of her drawer, pouring a saucer of the potent whiskey and downing it in one fluid motion. It looked like she would be staying at Freddy's for 5 nights, so if that were the case, it was fortunate that she was unaffected by her age change regardless of how long it lasted. The fifth headmaster leaned back in her chair, which was comfortable enough but not nearly as comfortable as the one in the headmaster tower, but the bustle around her triggered her OCD, which is a trait shared by all medical staff, and the sheer volume of clutter made her fold her arms across her flat chest and sigh in exasperation. She would just have to get past it, but only for a few days, long enough to see what Sakura was talking about. The little screen was left on the desk in front of her. No matter how amazing it was, she wouldn't need it. Unlike Sakura, she was prepared since she had been warned, and as she completed her mental checklist and threat assessment, she glanced around twice. Every animatronic had a set of rituals and habits, and the only animals that would pose a threat to her tonight were the bunny and the chicken, who were the most active. Bunny came from the left and frequently entered the supply closet, while the chicken came from the right and enjoyed visiting the kitchen. The chicken would stay longer, but Bunny came the closest. The fox loves to break into the guardroom, but that wouldn't be a problem until tomorrow. You had to keep a tight eye on him to keep him at bay, so it wouldn't be hard to incorporate it into a routine. He was the group's strategist, able to think of ways to counter his opponent's advantages and act with amazing stealth, so she didn't care what he came up with, she would just have to work around it. And the bear wouldn't be a problem, at least not for the first few days. As midnight approached, she thought about her supplies. The establishment's only sensible rule was that they did not allow outside food, but they were helpless to enforce it, not when ceiling arrays were involved, at least not with ninjas. That did not mean she should not follow the rules, though, because their food wasn't bad, it was good, but most of it was salty, and she would be drinking more water due to the extra salt and the stuffy, hot atmosphere in the room, which meant that she would be using the restroom more frequently, which was the last thing you wanted when you were deep in enemy territory. Additionally, the entire electrical system of the room was powered by a single, limited source, so when she used her ability excessively, the generator that powers everything would cut off, and the bear allegedly flourished in the dark, which made matters worse. There was no way to lose power, and even though it seemed like a good strategy, she didn't think faking dead would buy her that much time. She smiled to herself. She didn't care. She was a member of the Sannin tribe, one of the best ninjas of her generation. She had spent years working in hospitals and behind enemy lines. They were also avoiding collectors. She could control her body's desires and impulses and stretch out supplies. The secret would be moderation, which Shizen was adept at, despite her claims regarding her drinking habits. Fifth Headmaster had a more comprehensive understanding of the body than her trainee, who increased the overall efficacy of her ears. Therefore, she made her hearing more sensitive to harsh noises, like footsteps, rather than simply turning up the level overall. She could see both doors from the comfort of her chair. The light and door buttons were easily accessible. She started to send energy from her core to her eyes and ears. And by strengthening her peripheral vision, she also improved her eyes' ability to detect shapes in the dark. As she pulled herself back into a comfortable posture, she leaned forward and opened her rice ball box, making sure a bottle of water was close by. She smiled broadly and said, "Go for it if they were going to treat it like a game as long as she continued to be in this childlike state." She drank a few sips of water after finishing the goodie, but she would have wanted a bottle of good sake, well, anything, because children didn't drink alcohol and she was working covertly. The fifth headmaster appeared languid as she worked her way through a rice ball. This was a rather dull job, and after 3 hours, not much had happened. Yes, there had been a few visits from the bunny and chicken, but they posed no threat. The first time she had done it earlier tonight, it had been risky, but the gamble paid off, unlike when she was in the casinos. As long as you told the animatronics that you were aware of them, they didn't appear to move, and if you waited long enough, they didn't seem to move. She heard faint footsteps just as the murky figure of the chicken appeared, and she pointed at the door without looking, catching the metal puppet's stare without focusing all of her attention on that one spot, making sure her finger stayed on target the entire time.